Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of 50 Years Serving the Island, a series of programmes showcasing highlights from Manx Radio's archives during the station's first 5 decades serving the public in the Isle of Man. In 1968, Manx Radio was transferred into public ownership and became the island's public service broadcaster. Today, we rejoin David Callister in conversation with entertainer Laurence Kermode for Time to Remember.
Before you sang, didn't you play an instrument? I seem to remember you played a banjo. And
That's another phase. Yes, that was earlier. That would be, I'd only be 18 then, right about 18.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned earlier Edwin Crellin, who was in school with me. Well, we were obviously the same age. Now, I was friendly with Edwin and Bobby Kelly, Freddie Ogley. We were all in the 1st Douglas Scouts. But by this time at 18, Bobby was a wonderful pianist, you know, Bobby Kelly.
Yeah.
And Edwin was, as I said before, he was the intellectual type. He sent away for a saxophone, and he'd learned it before it came, you know. He knew how to play it. Well, he'd learned it by reading
the book.
Yes, he was one of those type.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. And Freddie was a hard man. He was the drummer, you see.
Yeah.
And I was learning the banjo. Now, I was going to lessons, and I remember I used to go to a man up in Onchan. He was an old fella, he was, but I was already in the band. You see, I was starting the cart before the horse, because I was a singer. That was why I was in with this guy. I was the singer. I actually sang, and people may laugh about this, but it actually did happen before the days of microphones and radio and all that sort of thing.
Didn't have a megaphone, did you?
I sang through a megaphone, and I've got the photograph to prove it. I'll show it to you later on. It was there because I've got a photograph. We were the Knights of Rhythm. Bobby Kelly, piano. Edwin Crellin, saxophone, Freddie Ogley on the drums, and Laurence Kermode was the singer holding the banjo. The banjo, as a matter of fact, my career with the Knights of Rhythm came to an end by virtue of the fact that the banjo didn't belong to me, it belonged to my uncle. Yeah. He had it, he'd never played it or whatever, but he lent it to me. That's when I started learning lessons. And then he must have fallen on hard times because he wanted the banjo back. and so, of course, that was the end of my career as a banjo player. I did later on, of course, when I appeared, when we talked about, I played the guitar a little bit. As a matter of fact, the very first guitar I ever bought, I only bought 2 as a matter of fact, but the first one, I brought it to you and asked your opinion of it.
And what did I say?
You were very diplomatic about it. You said it wasn't too bad, it was all right. I think I paid £16 for it or something. Oh, before that I'd bought one. Long years before that, I think.
Yeah.
And then I sold that. I don't know what happened. I never went any further with it. I just had ideas of playing the guitar.
But didn't you play flute and
oh,
mouth
yes,
organ?
Oh, yes. I got mixed up with Mike Williams, you see, with the Mike, Laurie and Al story. How I come to be involved with Mike was in the end of the 60s, 69, 70s, the folk revival had started. And the Mannin folk, who were in those days were known as the travelling people, but they had to change their name because of somebody else was travelling people and they objected to them in England. Anyway, I used to go there down with my wife and sometimes on my own down to the lodge, Glen Helen.
Oh, yeah.
Glen Helen they were playing.
Yeah, that's right.
They were the residents in there, and a certain night they used to play there regularly, and I used to go down and listen to them. They would do a set, and during their interval, there was a young fella get up and play a guitar, and he'd do half a dozen songs maybe, and come off. And whilst I was there, and they were playing, and I remember, and I would sing my guts out, you know, joining in at the chorus, and I was known there, and be in the front row, and they were saying, Laurie is doing this, and blah. And I remembered that I could play the mouth organ when I was a boy.
Oh.
So I bought a mouth organ, one of these blues harp mouth organs, a vamper they call them. I was joining in when they were playing. I said, what key you're in? You know, tell me, you know, I'm playing. Whenever you're in G, you know, I'll play, you know, I'll join in with you.
Yeah.
And then I used to do this quite often, you see, and this young fella, Mike Williams, I found out his name was, I met him during one time talking to him in the passageway or something, in that place where you all meet. he said, would you like to come along with me? He said, I'm playing somewhere. Anyway, I got attached to him somehow.
Yeah.
And he was playing in the cellars of the original place up on
Fort Anne.
Fort Anne, yes, in the cellars there. And on Wednesday night, I used to go there. And he was playing, and I used to follow him and I'd play there with him. He was getting paid, but I wasn't involved with that at all. I was just following him around. And we also used to go to a place in Laxey.
You were playing a bit on the
mouth
they used to call it the harp in folk circles. The mouth harp, wasn't it?
Yes, it's the harp. It is a mouth harp, or the gob harp, some people call it. But it's a harp, they call it. Yes, it is the harp. I used to always call it the harp. But it's the mouth harp. So eventually, somehow, I got involved with Mike, and as I say, he was playing up at the Fort Anne, and he was also playing at Laxey. He said to me one time, would you like to... He was in theatricals himself, doing a little bit, service players, I think, one of those groups, and he had a part in this play, and in the interval... Oddly enough, he was a Yankee sergeant in this with an American accent, with a Manx accent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A GI. In the interval, he was performing, so he said, "Would you like to come with me?" I said, "Aye, all right." So that was my very first public performance, really, and the very first thing we did was Dirty Old Town.
Oh yeah.
And we also sang and did Laxey Wheel, I suppose, and. But I sang with Mike then, and then the manager of the Fort Anne was an Irish fella, and he was very interested in folk music. And there was another group of people, I didn't know them then, but this manager was getting transferred from the Fort Anne to the Castlemona.
Yeah.
I'd met this group once out at I mentioned Mike was playing out at Laxey. Well, he said, there's a room outside. We used to play in the bar down below with our backside up against the fireplace to half a dozen people that were in the bar, that's all. Yeah. Mike said, well, there's this other group on. I'd never met them before. But it was Triad.
Oh, yes.
And they played, Mike and I did the traditional stuff, or acoustic, I should say. They were electric and acoustic. I must have by this time had a bit of a repertoire with Mike, you see. Well, I had a repartee with Mike as well as repertoire.
Yeah.
Difference, but the two things that we both enjoyed. So he said he said they're quite good, really. Anyway, the next thing was this manager who's got the transfer to Castlemona said, well, we go down there. So I still wasn't getting paid, but now Mike was hired, Mike Williams, and Triad, there were two. Well, I went down with Mike. Well, I was a couple of nights there with Mike and Triad. You see, they would do a set, then Mike and I would go on and do a set, and so that's how we split the night. After a couple of nights, one of these chaps in Triad said, I think you deserve paying, Larry. He said, you're not getting paid. I said, no. Well, he said, why not? So the next thing, Friday night, we were playing 2 nights, Friday and Saturday. I got £2 on Friday. I thought, oh, this is great, £2. I'm talking about 1970.
Yes.
71.
Yes.
1970 it was, 71. And then I appeared on Saturday and I got another £2, I said, oh, it's fine. And then it went on from there.
Yeah.
Well, we were in the Castlemona playing for 3.5 years.
Right.
2 nights in the winter, Friday and Saturday. In the summer we played Thursday, Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
Not only that, I was only with Mike then. There was just Mike and Laurie then. That was our act. I was with Mike for 7 or 8 years, I think, before Al joined us.
Yes, that's Al Laurence, of course.
Al Laurence joined us, yes. Well, we, apart from singing in the Castlemona, Mike and I, we were also the resident singers in the Falcon Cliff Hotel for the folk club that was up there.
You're listening to 50 Years Serving the Island, a series showcasing highlights from the Manx radio archives from the station's first 5 decades as the Isle of Man's public service broadcaster. Today we hear more of entertainer Laurence Kermode's memories of life in the Isle of Man in years gone by, recorded for Time to Remember in 2001.
So you went then into a Toastmasters get-up, didn't you? Now, how did that all happen, the Toastmaster?
Well, it all started, I was still doing bits of compere jobs and that sort of thing. And the first Toastmaster proper in the Isle of Man had been a man who was employed by a man called Perry, the manager of the Villa Marina. He was friendly, I think he used to drink with this man who had been a Toastmaster in England, who was a Manx fella that I knew because I sang with him. He was a wonderful bass voice, Phil Corlett. Now Phil was a chorister in Liverpool Cathedral. He worked as well, but he was a chorister, beautiful, wonderful bass voice singer, and I used to sing duets with him at these various functions, you see. I mean, if we got a quid or 2 quid, we were lucky, you know. And Perry knew Phil lived in Castlemona Avenue, had a boarding house there, and he used to drink with him in the Central, the pub there. And he needed a Toastmaster, Perry, he said. So he said to Phil, you know, he'd been on the circuit in Liverpool, the Masonic circuit, singing, you know, round about, employed by Rushworth and Dreeper. They used to employ these. So they got Phil. He said, I've seen them. Phil said, I know, you know what then. What do you want me to do? Just make a few announcements, you see. And it was for the corporation, for these dance things, you know. They used to have these people coming over, conferences, you see, and they needed something to do this. So he did it, and as a matter of fact, the red coat belonged to the corporation. They used to keep, you know, hang it up. Anyway, after he went back to Liverpool, or he retired. I think he went back to Liverpool. Not sure now. But anyway, Phil retired from it, and Dan Miney took over the job. They gave it to him because Dan, of course, had been ringmaster down in the circus down where the present bus station is. There was a circus there once upon a time.
He'd been ringmaster there?
Yes, he was a ringmaster there. And they asked Dan, you see, well, Dan was also another man of parts. He was a plasterer by trade, all the Mineys were. And wonderful singers and voices, you see. But he was also a coach driver at this time, and he couldn't do a performance for the Villa, you see, one occasion. And it was the local government, LGB I think they were, but they were having a big conference over here. And he couldn't do it, and they asked me, I don't know if it was him that approached me or the Villa knew me. He said, you know, what, you just make these announcements, you had, you know, people coming down and blah, blah, blah. Just watch. So I went the night before to see Dan, what he was doing, and making these announcements. I thought, well, I can do that. I'm used to making announcements. So that was the red coat was hanging up in the in the props room there, the Villa Marina, you know, in the foreman's room.
So there was no formal training.
No, not at all. No, you just played it by ear, you see. And I knew, and of course, well then, oddly enough, these people said to me, look, we said, Mr. Kermode, we've got a lunch here on so-and-so, can you do that? Oh, I said, well, or maybe an evening job, whatever it was. I said, oh yes, but I said, what about Mr. Miney? I said, never mind Mr. Miney, they said, we're asking you, can you do it? I said, well, yes, I can. So I did it. But how I knew the routine of Toastmasters, of formal things, because of my background in Freemasonry, you see. And been to all these various functions, so I knew what you needed to do. I made it up from there, and more or less, you know. And I'd seen, and other people had been over from across, and I'd seen them do it, and I'd had people saying you're as good as they are and better, and you know. So so that. But
still wearing the corporation's gear, were you?
I was for a while, yes. And then eventually I bought my own red coat, you see. And there was a fella over, you remember Alec O'Brien?
Yes.
Now, Alex was out at the
Alex Inn.
Alex Inn. And he knew me working at the Palace because he was a bars manager there as well. He was mixed up with the two, or he got the manager of the restaurant. He was a bit of a smart worker, you know, Alex. And he knew me, and he rang me one time. He said, Laurence, he said, I've got a guy coming over, he said, was a tailor. He said, you interested? I said, oh, aye. He said, he'd make you a red coat. So, what was his name now, this fellow? But anyway, he was from Manchester. He measured me up at the Palace there, and went over there, he measured me up for this red coat, and came back in a fortnight's time with the, you know, fit try-on. He was making for a few local businessmen.
Oh, yes.
Because there weren't any tailors about.
No.
They died out, you
Yes.
see. I'd tried to get, and nobody seemed to know. Burton's didn't know what a red coat was for, or, you know.
Yeah.
So they were the only thing I would hope. So he came over and he made me this wonderful red coat. I didn't know at the time, but that year he was the top tailor of Britain, and I have photographed him with all the various trophies
Really?
he won that year.
It must have cost you a fair old packet to buy it.
Well, it was a lot of money then. It
Yeah.
was over 50 quid, you see, for a
Yes.
coat. I mean, that was just for the red
a lot
coat.
of money then, yeah.
Of course, it was a lot of money. And then I had to the white tie and
All
you
the
know
rest of it,
all
yeah.
the rest of it, black trousers
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stiff white shirt and cufflink, the whole
Yeah.
caboose, you know. It was from there. I went on from there, you see.
As Toastmaster.
As Toastmaster.
Then you saw one or two royals, didn't you?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, you see, I was working first mostly for the corporation, all these conferences. So any of the top people that came over, and I worked with all the top trade union leaders that have been over here, politicians and all that carry on. And then I was doing work for the government as well. You see, I was the only professional Toastmaster.
Yes.
I mean, you were a compere and lots of people, but they weren't interested in this sort of thing as I was, the formality, you see.
Yeah.
Not only that, I had, when I mentioned before about it, I also bought a book, you see, on Toastmastering,
Yeah.
written by an old professional Toastmaster. So I read up all on that, you see, all the protocol. So it wasn't just my background in masonry, it was other things as well, you see.
Yeah.
So I knew what you should have done. And then anybody that came over and they were involved with the government or the corporation and they had big functions, I was there.
Yeah.
For many, many years, I always did the Tinwell banquet, which was held on the evening of July the 5th,
Yes.
mostly down at the Golf Links Hotel.
Yeah.
But at one time we did it up in the College of Further Education.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I'll always remember that because the Minister of State, it was the Labour Minister of State he was, and I've mentioned this before about Toastmasters, about people, no matter who they are, they're all nervous when speakers, when they get up to speak. And if you're standing behind them, you can watch their body language, you know. They'll say to you, you know, this guy, this head of state. And he turned around to me after he'd said his speech, and he turned around and he said, was they all right?
They would give away their nerves in one way or another, these guests then.
Yes, yes, yes. But my first introduction to the royal family, if you wanted to know about the royal family, was way back in 1965 when Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon, she was married to Lord Snowdon then in those days, and she came over to open some, I don't know what it was, a pier or something anyway, and the do in the evening was at the Grand Island Hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Now I was down there. And what I noticed about Snowdon, he was immaculately dressed, he was very, very smartly dressed, and she was lovely. What surprised me first was how small she was. Of
Yeah.
course, I realise now, since the Queen and all, they're all small,
Yes.
short in stature, like old Victoria, Queen Victoria, see.
Yes.
But his suit was, the back seam down here was sort of stitched together, so it was a permanent seam. They used to do the creases in your trousers like that, some men used to do that. But afterwards, at one point in time, she was surrounded by a group of people afterwards, some of the top table, you know. I know it was before or after she went. She's a great smoker, you see.
Oh, yes.
And I was stood off, as you might say, because you don't mix in with these people.
No.
You are part of it, but you're not with them. You're not one
Yes.
of them. And, of course, you don't approach royalty ever.
No.
You never speak to them until they speak to you. She was surrounded by these people talking to her, and she had a cigarette, and she was puffing a cigarette, and there was no ashtray there. She was in the middle of the room, no ashtray available, and she was looking round. So I realised what she wanted was an ashtray, so I went up to her, gave her the ashtray. She dumped her fag in the ashtray and said, thank you. So I rescued, and I came across it the other day, and I wondered what it was. I thought it was Paul had been sneaking a quiet fag when he was younger. But anyway, I realised what it was. I rescued this stump out of the ashtray, put it in my pocket and took it home. So when I got home, we were in the boarding house then, and my wife and the other people, the staff, oh, well, what was she like and all this kind of, and what did she say to you? So I told them this story, and I said, and that's the sum total of the conversation I had with Princess Margaret. She just said thank you. And that was it. And the last of the royals that I dealt with was Prince Edward. Now the story there, it wasn't I don't think it was a Tynwald night, I don't think it was, maybe, whatever it was, there was this do at the Golf Links Hotel. Now, on that day, the very same day, he was only 21, Prince Edward, when he came over. And that very day, I had heard on the radio that he had he got his degree, BA, Bachelor of Arts. So I thought to myself, now, should I include this in the preamble, Prince Edward, Bachelor of Arts, you see? So I thought, that would be it. No, erring on the conservative side. Don't be a fool, Laurence, I said to myself. You're dealing with royalty here. Don't make a mess of it. So I didn't. I just did the usual preamble. His Royal Highness, blah, 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 His Royal Highness, the Prince Edward. So when he got up to speak, and he said to him, amongst his bits and pieces, blah, 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 and then he said, Mr. Toastmaster, he said, missed a wonderful opportunity, he said. He could have been the very first person to announce me with my new honours, he said, a Bachelor of Arts. So, you see, of course, a bit of a laugh. Now, it was a good thing that I didn't in two ways. It gave him the opportunity of telling people that he had got his Bachelor of Arts degree. And it was right for me because I've got the story to tell afterwards. And also, you never upstage the principal artist, the top dog, and he was a top man.
Of course.
Now, then the story goes on. The next night, because he was somewhere else, they were using him again at the palace thing. And I'm lined up there. It's now the casino, you see. And he's going into this special VIP's room, blah, blah, blah. And I'm lined up with other people, waiting for him to come in. And he comes in with all his entourage. And he looks over at me and he just laughed and he said, you again? Yes. So that was, I liked Prince Edward. I liked him very much.
Tell me this, did you introduce him as Bachelor of Arts the second?
No. I didn't. I never know. I thought, well, that's it. I did it my way, as you might say. Oh, God. So it was very good, that. So,
did you ever get yourself into a position like the famous Toastmaster of Michael Benteen, who finished up rolling around on the floor completely drunk, trying to introduce the ambassador?
I'm very happy to say no. It never happened to me, that. No.
You'd have to be careful, wouldn't you?
But you had to be very careful, and the great thing is this, and many people have said before me, the higher the ranking person they are in royalty or in the aristocracy or whatever, the higher they are, the more understanding they are and the kinder and civil they are. It's when you get upstarts, jumped upstarts, that think they're more than they are, So, but you always know your place. You treat them with respect and they respect you, you see, and they always... These people, as I think I mentioned it before, and if I didn't mention it, I said they always look, when you're talking about their little peculiarities, they know, you see, a Toastmaster can make or break them, because you're in charge of the banquet. You can do something, you could if you were so minded, but there's no Toastmaster fool enough to do it, to upset the whole business of while they're talking, or you could give them the wrong introduction, because although you introduce them, it's more formal than a compere of a concert. It's much more formal, you see, although a lot of the formality is going out of it nowadays. People don't want...
There's one thing I must ask you about, whether you're an old hippie, because here you've got a ring in one ear anyway, if not two, but one certainly.
Well, yes, I have got. There was quite a bit of a story about that. I always fancied earrings because my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, he always wore what they called sleepers. Both ears he wore them in, the baker. Little earrings, one in each earring. I used to admire these earrings, but I wouldn't dare wear them. My wife said, you do that, she said, and I'll buy you a handbag. She used to say this to me, But I always fancied the earring, but I wouldn't wear them. However, eventually, my younger son, Nigel, had a shop in Peel, and it was a boutique. And amongst the thing, he was selling jeans and all that sort. He was selling jewellery as well, and he was doing earrings, piercing people's ears, a quick gun thing. Well, we were down over the Christmas holidays one time, my wife and myself. He was showing us the shop, and he showed me. He said, "This is how you do it, Dad." You know, he showed me the things. A little gun they use. And when my mother was a girl, they used to stick a cork behind it and put a red hot.
Really?
Yes, hot needle through your ear. But anyway, so he said, "This is it. I've got an odd one here, a little stud, gold stud." I don't know where it is, gone somewhere. So my wife didn't say it because it was Nigel, so she wouldn't say anything about their son.
No.
And he did the treatment, you know, spirits and all that. Bingo. And I had the stud in my ear.
Yes.
And I wore it, but she never said a word about that. And people did say, some people, but they knew me, and they knew that I was a bit of an extrovert, so they wouldn't mind. But the present earring is my wife's wedding ring.
Oh. Right.
So when she died,
Yeah.
I had it made into a
Oh,
ring.
that's nice.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice?
So that's the story of the ring, of the present earring. But there's a little story about that before this was in, because it was my wife was alive at the time. She used to love to go up Douglas Head. We used to go up there and sit sometimes. And in those days, it's not long ago, they disappeared, and I don't know where they went, but they used to have four-sided shelters up at Douglas Head.
Yeah.
We sit in there, and I was painting at the time. My wife was in one side, round the corner. I was on the other side, looking out over the bay. And I was painting with a palette knife. And there were some children. And they're always interested, you see, in artists. Well, the trick is you don't say anything to them. I never speak to kids, children, not at first, see. So they're running around, and then they look and they spot you see. And then they go around, and gradually they come nearer, you see, and nearer. And there were these two little children. One was a little boy and one was a little girl, you see. And one would be about 8 or 9 or 10, round between that age group, you see. And eventually the little boy comes and sits alongside of me, saying, I never spoke to him, but I kept on painting.
Yes.
And he's talking to me, and you know what the children are like? He said, if I was going to paint, he said, if I was taking up paint, he said, I don't think I'd do it like that. He meant, thank you very much for that, you see. So the mother came, she was just in the distance, and she said, they're not bothering you, are they? Oh no, I said, it's all right, they're chatting. Then the little girl came, you see. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he says to me, why are you wearing that earring? I said, well, it knocked me off my perch a bit, you see. So he had one of these floppy hats on. So I said, well, I don't know. I said, why are you wearing that hat? And his sister, little girl, you know, so not what little girls are, you know, so knowledgeable and so worldly. She may be a year younger than him. Yeah. And she said, artists always wear earrings. Well, I laughed to myself, you know, it was so good. Eventually, those people, there were a couple, they used to come over. Every year they said they were waiting for the 4 o'clock boat to go because they wanted to spend as much time as possible. They used to come over, rented a cottage in the country, and then come and lose all track of time. They said they took their watches off, they ate when they wanted, they got up when they, you know, time by their body clock. And these two young children. And anyway, I sent them, they gave me their address, so eventually I sent them this painting, got it framed and sent them. They were very pleased about that.
David Callister speaking to entertainer Laurence Kermode for Time to Remember in a conversation recorded in 2001. And you can listen back to the full conversation, along with additional content from the Manx Radio archives, online at manxradio.com/portal.